Well, David, thanks so much for carving some time out of your day to connect. I wanted to take a few minutes to introduce you to those in our congregation who are not familiar with you or your work. You're the founder and director of Mockingbird Ministries. You've written a number of great books, one of which we're going to talk about today, and you also preach somewhat on a regular basis. Is that right?
That's right. And I've got three boys, a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 9-year-old, and I'm married to Kate, who's an artist, and we live in Central Virginia.
Well, that's awesome. Uh, yeah, I've personally benefited immensely from your work over the last 10, 15 years, and I'm really glad that we're able to bring you in to be a guest for our wisdom lecture series. When we talk about wisdom, one of my favorite definitions is that to be wise is to be competent with regard to the realities of life, not in the sense of having it all together or mastering life, but in the sense of telling the truth about what life actually is, and then learning to live faithfully inside of it. And your work has always felt deeply wise to me in that way, that you just refuse abstractions and you refuse to romanticize God or us or the Christian life.
Wow. What an amazing thing to say to me. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah,
I can't, I don't think, I think the beginning of wisdom, any beginning of it is never to cop to it or to like pretend that I would even those words would apply to me. But so thank you for saying them. I'll do my best to take it on board.
yeah, none of us presume to be wise, but we want to grow in wisdom. That's kind of our posture we want to take.
Mm,
And there is something about listening to that I feel like it's very grounding. Um, it pulls out of the abstractions, which theology can often be, and it brings us into real life and real relationships. And you've written a lot about how we live in this culture that's obsessed with self-optimization and
mm.
how we just feel this constant pressure to improve, to perform, to maximize ourselves, our obsession with metrics and numbers and how we're doing. And in a recent article, you said, as a Christian, I write against optimization because I write against despair. And I love that quote. What are you trying to say there? What are you driving at?
Yeah, I think the drive towards optimization, which is really just a contemporary word for self-improvement, and almost underlying it is really like a view of human beings as machines and technology, which is problematic, can be helpful in some with some sort of metaphors of talking about, oh, I'm wired this way, or let's process this together. I mean, these are all words that have snuck into our vocabulary, but I find that that assumption about human beings to be it presents a lot of challenges when it comes to love and relating to other people as are you flesh and blood or are you wires and copper, Um, but there's a sort of an unspoken drive toward the point of life is to constantly be improving or streamlining all things for the sake of efficiency and to become this best version of myself, um, which is appealing because our weaknesses hurt, and our inefficiencies can be painful and that we can suffer consequences for our imperfections. But what we come to find out is that it's false. It's just simply a false thing in that uh, human beings, we slow down as we age. And wisdom, in fact, one of the things that I don't look usually to Silicon Valley for wisdom. I look to them for, firmware updates and things like that, and ways to connect over Zoom, which I think are fabulous. But I think wisdom is usually the realm of it's something. It's the realm of the old. It's people or people who've suffered a lot. And the mentors I've had in my faith, especially, are those not whom have optimized themselves into a state of needing God less, but those who've been shaped by being loved in the midst of suffering and learning from their inability to basically fully um, function correctly as
Yeah.
machines. So I find there to be something anti-human about it, but also anti-God, because I very much believe in a God who is gracious and a God who looks like Jesus. And Jesus was not efficient, and Jesus was couldn't have been less machine-like in the way that he operated and dealt with people, and especially in the way that he loved people. And love there is almost unintelligible to the you can't to act that you could optimize love is a contradict in terms. And so I could go deeper into it, but
Yeah.
I think there's a lot there. The language of optimization is for me, if you embrace it too wholeheartedly, and often we do this unconsciously just through the things we imbibe and the images that are out there, we end up we end up embracing a form of life that says you're only valued according to your efficiency and your productivity and your quickness. And so, therefore, because the human being slows down and because the human being is mortal and the body fails, you embrace despair.
Yeah, I mean I find it so dehumanizing, and it also excludes large portions of the population, people with disabilities or people with, mental health struggles. And um, it's one of the
Hugely.
things, again, I love about the wisdom literature is it's very comfortable talking about our limits as human beings and recognizing our limits. And I think as we think about this is the culture we live in, it's the air we breathe, the pressure we all feel, and this pressure doesn't just stay out in the world, unfortunately. That it finds its way into the church so often, often under the guise of, the best of intentions. But in the big relief, you write that the church is often seen and experienced as a purveyor of spiritual and moral burdens, not a place to unload them. It's a place we go to be told what to do rather than to be told and to hear about what has been done for us.
Mm.
And I'm curious, you write, you travel. Why do you think that's such a common experience of the church? Because I think you're spot on.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to say there are plenty of exceptions to this particular rule. And
Yeah.
any church that is based on the Jesus and the Bible, which contains what we know about Jesus in most fully, is going to come into tension with some of the kind of Jesus as the church is simply a place to be told what to do and burden, because that's not at the heart of the story. So in the church, at least we have the opportunity to journey back or to be reminded of what the story is actually about, which is this, the Savior of the world coming to redeem those who have fallen short and continue to shoot themselves in the foot and others in all sorts of conscious and unconscious ways. And a sort of a way the message about of the gospel is a way forward for those who don't think there is a way forward. So why do I think it's so appealing? Is I think that we're interested as human beings in control, and that is to be out of control is deeply fearful, and to be in control is to eliminate fear. The problem, of course, is that none of us really, if control is an illusion, even in the best of times, even for those of us who have, all of our wits about us and are sort of on the upward swing of life and have yet to hit that, the downward slope. But and so anything that appeals to our sense of control is going to be more immediately marketable, and it's going to find a quicker uh, perch or, like, traction in the human heart. It will also end up. So what I would just say is, like, churches that tell people what to do, life is confusing, and people, we are confusing to ourselves. And so finding some place that can tell us what to do can be enormously clarifying and exciting, especially in the short term. The problem is that it doesn't usually work in the long term and can, in fact, create more burnout and disillusionment than it's meant to. So I'm trying to basically answer with a little bit of compassion for the fact that I understand why folks want to go to churches that lay burdens on them. And at first, sometimes um, being given a little bit of a roadmap for life when you feel like you never had one is a really it actually feels like grace to people.
Yeah.
However, that what I've also noticed is there's a human propensity to turn these uh, roadmaps into ironclad laws and new ways in which to feel like you're failing. And once people feel like Christianity, church has become just yet another thing that they're failing to live up to, that is a cruel irony because it really, I believe in my deepest heart of hearts that the church, or at least God, the suffering servant, Jesus Christ, is who we turn to when we've failed to when the burdens have proved too heavy and when we've failed to sort of live up to our side of the bargains. It's where you go when there's no place to go. That's the most beautiful picture of the church that I know of. And I guess that's a long-winded answer to a question that I'm trying to. Pastors have a lot on their plates already, and I don't want them to feel terrible about going to some quick answers for stuff or trying to outline the beautiful, wisdom of God's plan in the world. It's just there's got to be more if it's going to have any chance of sustaining the person through those times in life that where the burdens are simply too heavy,
Yeah.
even the spiritual and especially the religious burdens, to be the good Christian, to be the perfect, faithful person. I need to know that He is faithful even when we are faithless. And you do have those promises in Scripture. And in fact, I would say that that's the beating heart of the whole thing.
Yeah. We think about the spiritual life, it's a journey, right? That you have seasons. And I feel like early in the journey, it can be really helpful to give people a roadmap and to give them some, here's a Bible reading plan, here's some basic disciplines. But that only gets you so far. One of the things I felt as a preacher, I think I said this to the congregation last year. If we give three applications every sermon, that means we're giving 150 things for people to do every year. Just 150 more things to do in a world where social media, the news, everything's already giving us so much to do. And I think that's feeding some of the spiritual disillusionment that we have this notion that the Christian life is up and to the right. And the truth is it's like two steps forward, one step back, sometimes one step forward, two steps back. Um, and I'm curious, do you find that for Christians who've been on the journey with Christ for a while, do you encounter folks who've come back to grace in a way or had like a reawakening to grace 10 or 15 or 20 years into their spiritual journey?
Yes, I mean almost without a doubt, the people I know who are still Christians, we were,
Mm,
we were all in small groups together when we were in our 20s. The folks that were in love with the to-do list part of Christianity, the law,
yeah,
they most of them have fallen away or found some other more effective tether for that energy. But the ones that are still faithful Christians, and you don't want to set up a formula because then it becomes a different form of the law. But
yeah,
the ones who are still Christians are have some abiding sense that God is gracious and that I have my relationship with God is not this transactional um, scorekeeping thing, but it's a one of intimacy and love and dependence, and that's often paradoxically made deeper, more real through experiences of suffering and
yeah.
distance. So maybe that sounds like a little mystical, but it's really just I think the someone said a writer I admire once said that God comes to us disguised as our real lives,
Mm.
and I think that that's true. And I wish it weren't true that I will feel close to God when I finally get my act together. The more abiding and richer experiences is this sort of journey into deeper dependence. And I would say that the folks that I admire the most, the faith who've had shaped me, they get to the end of their lives and none of them are saying that they've made some significant progress. They all, but they do have this aroma, I guess is the New Testament language, but they have a kind of a air about them that where they're in deeper dependence and they're kind of more aware of how much they need God, and how much they needed God all along, and how close God has been, how close He has been, e- even when they didn't see, they couldn't tell. I mean, that's what faith is.
Yeah.
Um, I find that to be very infectious and very true, and that so I gravitate to voices that are like that. Um, Although I'm just like anyone else. I have that reflexive doubt when God doesn't give me exactly what I want when I want it. But I grieve for those who took on I think there is a seasonal shift. There is like, and sometimes what works really well when you're in high school, you need to take on some new resources and slightly new perspectives as you get older. And if you fail to, or if then you start to feel rejected or resentful of God or resentful of the people that sold you something that was in fact just age appropriate, but didn't have maybe the depth that is to be found in the tradition and has always been found in the scriptures.
Yeah. One of the things I've noticed as a pastor is I hear sometimes people will say it, sometimes they just, I sense it from them. They live with this feeling like I'm almost there. Like I've almost got it. I feel like I'm so close to finally figuring it out.
Mm.
And these days I ask them, figuring what out? Like going where? Um, but I wonder if that notion that, man, once I unlock this next thing, then I'm really going to be cruising in the spiritual life. I'm curious sometimes if that's not part of what's going on in the broader movement of deconstruction, that people are sold a spirituality that's, if you do these things, it's actually very mechanistic, like you were saying. Um, where what we see throughout the scriptures is that God often does his deepest and most profound work in the really hard parts of our life, and in disappointment and disillusionment. One of the parts of the big relief that I loved was a conversation with your mom, and when you became a parent, and you were talking like, "Hey, parenting advice, what do you have?" And she said, I want to get the quote right. She said, "My chief prayer for my children has always been that they would have their nervous breakdown early and with as little damage as possible." And I think that's a funny quote, but I think it's pretty striking. Like what was she trying to say? Or even as a dad of three boys, like what do you hear in that now?
I'm scared. I mean, I do hear wisdom. She's a wise lady, and she had to live through it. I watched. I
Oh,
can look back and see how she held her tongue and let us, uh, you know, suffer consequences or go down our own path for a little while when she didn't. She only all she had was trust in God. What she was talking about is she wanted us to have a real relationship with God, and a real relationship with God begins where your own sort of trust in yourself ends. And so you have to fall on your face, and there's no really there are maybe there. I don't want to say it has to always be a certain way, but it seems to be that you oftentimes have to come into contact with your own limitations,
mm,
before you can cry uncle and really, you know, grasp onto the rock of ages, as it were. And so that's what she was praying for. She was praying, what she was praying for there is not that we would suffer some kind of humiliating defeat or mental health crisis. She was wanting us, she thought the most the thing she hoped for most for her children was that they would have an uncontrived relationship with God that was not there because she wanted it to be there, but because God showed up and her child reached out and prayed and or experienced ran into that as theologically I would say that God grabbed a hold of at their worst moment, or at least at their least proud moment, or they experienced God's grace in a tangible way that was, you know, compelling and life altering, and all the things that she hoped for. And that's, I think that the other thing when you think about the people that you grow up with, and you see folks in their who's still walking with the Lord and who's not, or um, by and large, there's people who've got a lot of knowledge about God and a lot of theology that they could quote you, but sometimes that can be used as a defense against the reality of a living God, is not just a set of assertions. Um, but to a person, again, it, it is those who have encountered God, the God who is gracious, not a finger wagging, um, tyrant in the sky. So that was her prayer for us. I think it's been answered. It continues to be answered. I mean, I'm sure it's continued to be answered for herself. It's a risky prayer because it means she knew she didn't have the power to engineer those experiences for her kids. Um, and I think it's probably the thing they did. My parents are not perfect by any stretch, but they put they were given to put their money where their mouth is a little bit when it came to the they believed that God was not only real, but that God was gracious, and that God did for the people what they could not do for themselves, and that included their children, and that included them. So I got to see that lived out in a pretty special way. And now that I get older and I continue to hear people's experiences of faith and upbringing, I realize that it was miraculous. Might be might not be too strong a word. So it's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, that as a parent, I have five kids, and as a parent of five, I feel that feel what she's saying, and feel the temptation. I mean, I'm a pastor. They're pastors' kids. The pressure that they live under,
Mm.
whether it's stated, and even if my wife and I were like, we're not going to pressure you to be the perfect pastor kid, but they still carry it. And something you said there, I have just started paying attention over the years to the people in their 60s, 70s, 80s that I really admire spiritually. And one of the things they almost all seem to have in common is that they did have some kind of a breakdown, whether it was emotional, nervous breakdown or a breakdown in their life, but somewhere where they learn the hard way that they have real limits and that they're not in control. Which I think, again, that's a theme of wisdom literature, but that's where we so need grace. Without grace, that can be terrifying news to bump into your limits and your powerlessness, you know?
It's only terrifying if
Yeah,
without God's grace. That's why we do everything we can to avoid it. And yet no one can really avoid it. It just it depends on how I've seen people buffer themselves off from lots of forms of suffering in ways that are probably ultimately not serving them well, but I don't think no one gets out of here alive.
right.
Um, and the cult of optimization and just the enormous amounts of pressure that we live under to be that which we cannot be and never were meant to be it breaks my heart. And I need the compassion for myself as well, but it's a that pressure cooker of a world that we live in. um, I don't know. I think that there's a great opportunity for those who believe in the grace of God, because
Yeah.
everyone is uh, pretty close to the edge today, even if they're not willing to admit it. Like there's some way in which they feel like they're barely holding it all together, and just just on the edge of falling apart. And
Yeah.
so that's my experience of working in churches and with people over the years, is that this razor's edge that we live on is very real, regardless of how it sometimes may seem, especially on like a Sunday morning.
Even as you're talking there, that's one of the things that I've so appreciated about you and Mockingbird over the years is you say out loud the things that can be we don't necessarily want to say out loud, like hanging by a thread. Um, Church has that pressure to up and to the right, things are good, um, you've got your life together. And I recognize this as a preacher that every Sunday people come in and they're smiling and they're dressed well, but I know that there are fights in the car on the way there. There were fights the night before that parents are stressing out over their kids. And we try very hard to create a culture where you don't have to perform, but it's just so deeply embedded in us. And
Yeah, sorry.
one of the things you said in the Big Relief, your section on hypocrisy, I thought was so good. And one of the provocative things you said is we should advertise our hypocrisy because to do so is to say to the world, come on in, there's room for one more. You don't have to pretend any longer. Belovedness is not contingent on your virtue. I love that line. Or even your honesty about your lack thereof. Uh, yeah, like what you knew when you wrote that that would be a bit provocative, but I think we're kind of circling around it. But what exactly are you trying to say there?
Well, don't get me wrong. Hypocrisy is painful. Like it's painful to the person who is saying one
Yeah.
thing and doing another, but it's also creates damage in the lives of those who trust us. Like I don't want to in any way gloss over that, but I also believe there's no such thing as a non-hypocrite. So how do you live with both of these things? Like I believe you have a God who loves sinners. That's my who there's because there's no other types of people out there. Um, so I get weary of this pretense, and it's in the church, but it's everywhere, that somehow there are these fictional people out there who are living completely in line with their
Yeah.
values or with full integrity. And that's simply not true. Like, I wish it were true. I wish it were true of me, but it's not true. And so I would like to think of the church at its best is the place you go to fall apart.
Hmm.
My friend Sarah once asked her parents like why it was so important to them to take them to church when there was so much, it was difficult about the church culturally and locally. And they said, well, we wanted you to have a place to go when your life fell apart. And I think that that's what a thing to say to a kid, but what a thing to say to anyone because all of our lives do fall apart. So this isn't just to advertise your hypocrisy isn't to bless your hypocrisy or to somehow say that there's,
Brag about it.
brag about it, but um, it's the classic line, yeah, come in, there's room for one more. And if Jesus were waiting, if God were only interested in having a relationship with non-hypocrites, that church wouldn't exist. So I think that what's cool is to see is how God redeems these things and the cracks are where the light gets in and all that, um, all those
Yeah.
slightly platitudinous things that ended up being really true.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, the world puts a lot of pressure on us to act as though we're in control and that we are improving and that we are don't really have anything substantially wrong with us outside of possibly like a slightly messy house sometimes. But like the reality is that we're um, people who have all sorts of tied in all sorts of knots of our own making and those that have been made for us, and we're in need of God's redeeming that we cannot really pull off on our own or at all. So uh, I want to reclaim or at least attempt to trumpet the fact that we have a religion of salvation and a God who not just has to save, but loves to save, and who did not come into the world to condemn the world, but to save us. So, um,
Yeah.
because I see so many of us drowning in a sea of self-salvation that is I'm right there in the pool, like but the only way I've been able to hold on to anything resembling hope in a world that looks like um, just like again this pressure cooker kind of death march thing
Yeah.
of denial like is has been to look to continually and on Sunday uh, particularly to this glorious good news of a living God who's delighted to 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 forgive the sins and reconcile the brokenness of a world that is just drowning in despair.
Yeah. One of the things you've shaped in me is when I finish writing a sermon manuscript, I always stop and ask, what's the really good news in here? Like, am I giving good news to people this week? And if I'm not, I've got a lot more work to do.
Hmm.
When people come to hear you speak in a few weeks at Sojourn East, like, what's the really good news that you want them to hear that you hope that they'll walk away with?
They are not the exception to the rule, but also that God is. So I really, it's my fondest hope and desire and prayer whenever I speak, just like whenever I preach, is that people walk out a little lighter than when they came
Yeah,
in, because we were carrying so much, every one of us. Doesn't matter how old or young we are, or what stage of life. So I really feel that sort of the you can't, but God can message, and God has the good news of sort of what the historical good news of the forgiveness of sins um, and the grace of God for real people in their actual lives, not in some sort of,
yeah,
arrival that they're always two feet short of. Um, that's what I want to do my best to convey, uh, with humor and hopefully some images and fresh language that can, puncture the defenses, especially to reach the heart of people, because I think that that's where most of us are really living in our hearts rather than up here. Though I don't want to neglect
yeah.
the brain.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to leaving a little lighter, and really looking forward to our congregation getting to spend some time with you in just a few weeks. So thanks so much for carving out some time, and we look forward to seeing you.
Thanks, Kevin. I can't wait. I'm really, really touched to be invited. Can't wait to see you
Yeah,
guys.
absolutely.